example, a chatbot or a process automation tool using generative AI needs to go through some of these phases.
This is the phase where a lot of companies today are in and more on the POC form or maybe a prototyping form, right?
There are some intrinsic sort of changes to some of these systems, the way it operates, and also the way the field is evolving. What we are seeing now is a set of guiding principles around how generative AI technologies are deployed.
Hello everyone, welcome to yet another episode of AI Connect. Today we are going to be discussing an important point, a pivotal topic. As we have seen in last few years, the evolution and development of AI has been nothing short of spectacular. In fact, according to a recent report by PwC, the overall contribution of AI in the global economy is going to be in the tune of 15 trillion by 2030. That's a massive number. And one of the big portion of that contribution will actually come from generative AI technology. In last 4 to 6 quarters, we have seen again a huge amount of development within the generative AI space. And if we see 23 and 24 was basically spent on building and testing different models and different technologies, 2025 is probably going to see large scale of deployment for generative AI applications. Now, this is the pivotal moment. This is where we will see that so much of promises that are tied to this particular technology, we will be seeing the result, the performance of this technology. So, keeping that in mind, I'm going to invite Shiva to AI podcast episode today. And I'm going to ask Shiva how generative AI is going to see the life cycle from 2025 onward, and where is it now, Shiva?
Yeah, thanks, Jaydeep. Thanks for having me here. So indeed, as you said, we are seeing a lot more adoption of generative AI technologies from last year, and it is expected to grow further. What is happening right now is what we are seeing is essentially there are applications which are being developed using generative AI technologies, which are getting more and more into the mainstream. So if 2023 and 24 was more around experimentation, trying out various use cases, as we go along, a lot of these applications will move into production. What is becoming more and more important is some of the traditional aspects of software engineering, like reliability of systems, accuracy, performance, cost, optimization. All of that frameworks or all of those measurements need to come back into generative AI systems or applications using generative AI technologies as well. However, there are some intrinsic sort of changes to some of these systems, the way it operates, and also the way the field is evolving. So all of that needs to come together, and what we are seeing now is a set of guiding principles around how generative AI technologies are deployed, built first and then deployed, and then as well as how they are operationalized, right? So these guiding principles will evolve as we go along, but then I think right now we are seeing some of those initial frameworks which are ready to be adopted, and so that the generative AI applications can move into production scale.
Got it. Can we then look at or compare that as more of generative AI ops?
Correct. Yeah, so very similar to DevOps or MLOps that we know, we are also seeing the evolution of what is being called as GenAIOps. So that right through the proof of concept, build, and the operational lifecycle, you are continuously evaluating metrics around the performance of these applications which are using underlying generative AI technologies.
Got it. So let's take this broadly into 3 pieces that you mentioned, right?
Correct.
And maybe start with the first one where you said experimentation.
Correct.
Can you give us a broad outline without going into too much of deep. What it is going to be likely for that phase for generative AI. Perhaps we are already in that phase.
Yeah. Yeah. So typically, any application that needs to be built, be it, for example, a chatbot or a process automation tool using generative AI, needs to go through some of these phases. First one, I would call it as experimentation, right? Where you're trying to understand which is the base underlying large language model or generative AI model that will fit the business use that you're talking about, right? Obviously, that is very important because we need to look at characteristics of models, like whether they are multimodal, whether they are specialized in, let's say, a particular area like mathematics or medical. Choosing that technology or underlying model is more slightly, I would call it as an experimentation phase, right? Because you need to evaluate the accuracy, you need to look at cost. For example, you might want all of that data, all of that application to reside in your environment. Then you might want to choose an open source model which is deployed in your environment rather than an API based model like Claude or GPT, right? Those are aspects that we need to consider. The measurement or evaluation metrics at that stage are around accuracy, then performance, then cost, and then also specialization. What is the purpose of the model that you're going to use, right? So you evaluate, and then we typically finalize a model, base model. And also the important factor is, uh, usually there are like three techniques for utilizing the model. You do it via prompt engineering, you do it via RAG, or sometimes if these two approaches are not sufficient for your application, then you go for fine tuning of the model. So that again is a metric that we need to evaluate basis and choose the right method, right? Basis the accuracy of responses through these methods. So that I would call as an experimentation phase.
Got it. So to round it off, this is the phase where a lot of companies today are in, and more on the POC or maybe a prototyping form, right? Just to see that what really works in terms of their use cases or
Correct.
business case and what.
Correct. Yeah, a lot of the companies are there, but then in order for you to make use of, you need to go through the other stages. Build the application, build and scale, where once you do a reference implementation in the experimentation phase, you need to scale that, right? So that's where metrics around how do you manage your prompts? So how do you manage your various kind of content that is coming in? How do you manage how do you evaluate the accuracy of a model? For example, there are like various scores on which you can measure fluency, accuracy, and all of those things. And then
we will probably need to matrix to measure against.
Exactly. So you define metrics, and uh, then models output will change based on user behavior, data coming in. So how do you continuously measure the performance of the application with respect to some of the parameters that you have talked about? So all of those will need to be defined at the build stage.
So we have done that, we have experimented, we have defined, we have figured that these are the matrices that against which we'll be measuring. What's next after that?
The next is you build the model and then you operationalize that model, right?
Okay.
So that's when the
implementation happens.
Yeah, the implementation happens, and then the model is in production. That point in time, there are aspects around observability, how the model output is changing with respect to new data coming in, user behavior, all of that needs to be tracked.
Models are also coming
Yeah,
in.
absolutely. This field, as we have been seeing, is evolving rapidly. There are like versions of models. Recently, I saw a framework which was circulated by Andrew Yang, where you can actually experiment with multiple models in the same code base. And so you might want to try and experiment with some other newer model which has come up which has come recently, right? So those kind of things need to be constantly evaluated and measured against the application's desired performance, right? So that's when the operational part of the measurement comes in.
Okay. So this is where the operationalization is happening, and then all the applications are put in production environment. The outputs are measured, checked, fine-tuned. What next after that?
Yeah, typically what is becoming more popular, and then we have also used some of these techniques, is you create a evaluation framework which actually sits along with the pipeline in production, so that you are able to see the outputs fit, accuracy, performance in real time, right? And also cost and all of those things in real time. So there are like dashboards, there are matrices that get published on an ongoing basis, which the ops team can look at. And then obviously if there are some, they're not meeting your criteria, then you want to go back and make a change. So that's the sort of operational evaluation piece that needs to get integrated with the model pipeline, so that you are continuously evaluating your output.
Got it. So this is a continuum, of course, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
From a patient standpoint, how are we addressing this for our customers? Can you shed some lights on that? How you plan to look at and address these continuum to ensure that the operation is stabilized, the performance is consistent,
Correct.
and there is no disruption in the production environment.
Correct. So we are also seeing a lot of these frameworks coming up from some of the large vendors like Google, Microsoft, etc. And basis our experience, now that we have productionalized a few of these applications, what we have also built is a set of matrices and evaluation frameworks that run along with the model when in production, right? And then we are able to evaluate the model on a performance on an ongoing basis. So that's a evaluation framework that we have come up with as well.
Okay. That looks as a natural progression,
Yeah.
to be able to support going forward the life cycle of generative AI applications and technologies that it
Correct.
brings. Great. So any other points you think is important to mention here, context of life cycle of generative AI?
Only thing I would say is this field is rapidly evolving and changing. So what needs to happen is we need to be agile in our approach from a measurement and evaluation perspective, and then integrate these matrices, these frameworks right through the life cycle. If you we also recently published a blog around the framework to select a model at the experimentation stage,
Right.
or the base
Right.
model stage.
And I
Right.
think we can put that link in our description for the video.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we are soon coming up with the evaluation framework that we are building right now, and which we have sort of basis some of the experiences that we have, that will be useful in the build stage as well as in the operational stage. So these are some of the tools and technologies that we are coming up with, and there are also aspects of it which is available from some of the larger vendors, but then obviously you need to customize. So all these things are essential. So if you look at it from a software engineering point of view, for example, whenever we make a change, we need regress, and then a lot of those tests are automated, right? Regression tests. Similarly, even in the generative AI context and ops context, we are coming up a lot of these automated frameworks which can measure the performance of the application on an ongoing basis.
Got it. So this is an important conversation, and I think this is going to be an ongoing dialogue, at least from our end. And you will see that in the future we will do more episodes focused on those three different phases as we spoke today, and deep dive into each of these, bring in more insights, more learning, and share with you here in this cast. One of the important things probably I missed out, and probably that is going to be part of the phase, or maybe even phase two as well, but phase one is critical, is the other aspects of generative AI, right? One important quality or that is associated with generative AI is trust, right?
Yeah.
Whether it is security, whether it is bias, whether it is hallucination, all of that will, I guess, is going to be part of the phase one.
Exactly. Yeah.
Moving into phase two as well, and
Right.
that's why it's continuing to. So
Correct.
each model will probably bring in better version of those aspects, and I think we will continue to support that as we discuss that.
Correct. Yeah. So when I talked about performance, I mean that includes some of these aspects as well, not just like application performance, but then performance with respect to trust or reliability and safety as well. So all these parameters need to go into the evaluation matrices and are being adopted as we speak in a large sort of scale environment.
Great. So I guess with this, we will wrap up this episodes here. In the future, we are going to cover each of these aspects more in depth. For now, Shiva, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jaideep.
And we'll meet again on this topic.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.